Work with me for just a moment. Imagine the scenario. Inside your organization, there's a rumor of something new about to happen. Everyone's been called together into the town hall meeting. And as everyone starts to gather, the CEO walks into the room. And as the music starts to play, he looks out to the audience and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I've invited you here today for the launch of our new digital strategy. It is a strategy that will be good for each and every one of us. It will be good for our shareholders, and it will be good for our customers. But I alone can't make it happen. I need each and every one of you to come together, not just as a department, not just as a team, but as a family, because only as a family can we make our strategy come alive." And he looks out and says to the audience, "Are you with me?" And everyone's shouting, "Yay!" and cheering. And as the music fades out, two guys at the back of the room go, "What was all that about?" "I don't know, but there's a free breakfast. Let's go and get something to eat." And off they go. On any given day, somewhere in the world, there's a CEO launching the new strategy with all the promises and excitement. But what percentage of strategies deliver on their promises? Well, this is what I'm going to have the pleasure of sharing with you this morning. And thank you to James for the kind introduction. He's actually put a picture of Hamilton Island so I can at least think that's where I was. Thank you for Ed for the invitation and for the honor of being able to share with you how you achieve excellence in execution. And I'm going to kick off with a quiz. So I've got about seven questions just to see your understanding of where we are in our journey towards excellence in execution. And they're multiple guess. So number one, what percentage of strategies do you think are successfully executed? 10, 50, or 80%? So just on your own, a quick guess. And the answer is, it's around 50%. And I'm going to share with you this morning how that's actually an improvement from where it was. And the research comes from my own company, Bridges. Now, what about digital execution? What percentage of digital strategies are successfully executed? 20, 50, or 80%? Only 20% are being successfully executed. Whether you look from IBM, McKinsey, Forbes, all showing very similar results. Number three, how much of your strategy planning do you have in place before you start to execute your strategy? 50, 80, or 100% of the planning? And the answer is 80%. Now, if we were live, a lot of people shout out to me 100. Why is it 80? Because you get the fundamentals in place, and then you get going. But if you wait till 100%, by the time you start to execute, it's too late. Because as we've seen, the market changes very quickly around us. Number four, what percentage of people in an organization even know their own organizational strategy? 5, 35, or 55%? And the answer is only 5% of people even know what the strategy is. And I will share with you around the importance of nurturing communication. Number 5, what percentage of people know the right actions to take to even execute the strategy? 12, 32, or 42%? Only 12% of people even know what to do. 1/8 of the organization. No wonder we're struggling so much with execution. Number 6, are business leaders accountable for the technology targets and measures? Now this one's 50-50, true or false. And it's true. In the research and work we do in implementing digital, this is one of the best practices, where business are responsible for technology and vice versa. And number 7, what percentage of leaders are good at both crafting, which James was talking about yesterday, and execution, which we're focusing on today? What percentage of leaders are good at both? 8, 24, or 48%? And the research from Paul, who published in HBR, shows us that only 8% of leaders are good at both. In other words, when we look at the survey and the quiz, the research, it's all stacked against you. So what I'm going to have the pleasure of sharing with you is what does it take to execute with excellence. And my first warning is that as many executions fail as succeed. So after all the fanfare, the promises, the excitement, it doesn't deliver. I launched my company 20 years ago to specialize in strategy implementation. And I came from Citigroup, where I was regional VP in Asia Pacific, covering Australia and New Zealand. And over the last 20 years, I've continuously researched how implementation is performing. And I'm delighted to say that it's been a steady improvement. And you can see 2020, our latest research, that for the first time ever, just more implementations were succeeding than failing. But there is an outlier. In our research, we discovered that if you look specifically at digitalization, 84% were failing around the world. And this was consistent with other research. So traditional strategies in the past, we were getting better. Why is digitalization so tough to execute? Because there are so many moving parts and so much going on. McKinsey actually said that digital technology destroys value because you're investing so much up front, putting in your re-architecture of your technology. The investment is so heavy, and then we're failing 84% of the time. It's destroying the value. So with the short time I have with you, I would like to challenge some of your beliefs. During my presentation, you may go, huh? And disagree, but that's good. Because if you agree with everything I said, then I failed you in my presentation. Because we're failing 84% of the time at digital and only half the time traditionally, so we've got to start to think differently. About 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be working with one of Singapore's largest banks and one of the global fashion companies and luxury companies who were focused very much on digitalization. And my company pivoted, so for the last 5 years, we've researched and worked with organizations to implement digitalization. And here is our most important message to the C-suite. It's not about having a digital strategy, but it's about having a strategy to compete in a digital world. So don't get consumed around digitalization and all the new technologies. You still have to look broader at the bigger picture and what's going on. For example, when I used to live in Australia, many years ago, Strategy at that time, on average, used to take about 7 to 8 years. So once you had a strategy, for the next 7, 8 years, you were set. What is the average time of a strategy today? Is just 4 years. And it takes approximately 18 months to 2 years to start to really successfully implement. And just as you start to implement successfully, leaders have to start thinking about what's the next strategy. So we're accelerating the cadence, the whole speed of which we're doing the strategy, planning the strategy, and executing it. And in today's pandemic, what is the impact? Well, many organizations, we have less working capital, so we have to do more with less. Many organizations are looking at new business models to compete in this new way of working. There's a lovely example from Manly, just off Sydney, where Garfield's one of the coffee shops. They had to restructure their business at the beginning of COVID, and they actually closed once a week, so they were open less, and they reduced their staff, which was saving straight to the bottom line, but yet profits and revenue have gone up. Huh? How come? Because the leaders of the coffee shop were very smart, and they recognized that people were not going over to Sydney for business, so they started offering business lunches, and they were actually attracting people over on the ferry during the day, and Manly's actual lunch consumption went up. Just a small example, but all of us are looking at different ways of working. We're also creating new revenue streams. So I'm going to share with you examples of how businesses are generating new revenue. And the challenge for yourself as a leader is that you're under increasing pressure to implement right the first time. Because we have shorter working capital, because we're changing the business, we don't have the luxury of trying it 2, 3, 4. We've got to get it right. And boards put tremendous pressure on the C-suite. But the problem we see with leaders is that they underestimate the whole implementation challenge. They assume that once they launch the strategy, it gets done. Huh? It doesn't, though. It takes tremendous focus. So let's put the spotlight firmly on excellence in execution, and what does it take? And when you see the slides change to the color green, like they just did in the quiz, is when it's going to be an interactive question. So here's another question for you. Would you prefer to have A, a good strategy, but it's implemented badly, or B, a bad strategy, but it's implemented well? Now, there's no C, okay? You have to choose A or B. Which would you prefer? Now, if we were all together, I would ask for a show of hands and we would vote. But I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world and ask leaders this question. 80% of the time, they answer A. They prefer to have a good strategy implemented badly. And they say to me, Robin, if we have a good strategy, we have the foundation. We're going in the right direction. If things aren't working, we'll change it along the way. The correct answer is B. Huh? Now, even though most people say A, why is B the right answer? So let me explain. First of all, how do you know if a strategy is good or bad? Only when you execute it. Nobody walks into the boardroom and says, okay, guys, today we're going to come up with a bad strategy. No, everyone thinks they have a good strategy. Now, but why does that make B the right answer? What does good implementation mean? It means inside the organization, we have the systems, the structure, the standards, the reviews, the analysis, the measurement, the processes all aligned and moving. And here's the key point. When the strategy is not working, you know. Now, But unbelievably, most leaders don't even know how their strategy is doing. But when you're good at implementation, you have the discipline, and when it's not working because you know, you go back upstream and you can make the changes. Excellence in execution is all about having the discipline to take the right actions. And this is what I'm going to share with you in more depth. But of course, given the choice, we all want, as we go into 2021, a winning strategy successfully executed. And one of my favorite examples comes from IKEA. They've had the same strategy for 50 years. It's all about taking the legs off a table and sending it flat and letting you build it yourself. But not only have they got a great strategy, but they're also methodical around their execution. So for example, recently they opened up in India, but before they opened, they learned, they studied, and they worked on the market difference. And they discovered that building yourself, DIY, is not popular in India. So what did they do different? When you check out, you have the option to build it yourself, or somebody will come and build it for you. Now, it might sound a very small difference, but for IKEA, it was a difference between success and failure. Just a little bit of fun. So here's another warning. Most organizations are even poor at creating strategy, and even worse at the execution. So when you can get it right, this is what makes a business differentiator for you. And quite often in the room, I'll say, why does execution fail? And people know. They shout out the answer. Poor communication, bad measures, not clear on what to do, leadership not engaged, not following through. Most leaders even know why it fails. So here's the $6 million question. If leaders know why it fails, then why does it keep failing? Well, in my latest book called Digital Implementation Playbook, as well as some of the others, I've looked into this. And here's the story so far. In an organization, this is the current equation. They'll put in place the vision, mission, and values. The vision, our future. The mission, our core purpose. The values, our guiding principles. Then you need the strategy to deliver on the vision. Then you apply the change management, and this will give you the results. Is okay? No! This is what we've always done. And if you always do what you've always done, you don't succeed in excellence in execution. So from our research, what happens different? And over the last 20 years, I've published a number of books around execution. The last two have all been on digital, and there's one more coming out in the next few months on the story of how DBS Bank in Singapore got recognized as one of the world's best banks. And what we discovered from our research is that the companies go beyond traditional change management, and they put the spotlight on the execution. Now, is it just a matter of semantics? What's the difference? And for the second part of my presentation, this is what I'm going to share with you. What is it that the successful companies do differently? We identified there were 8 areas of excellence and execution. Now, you're not going to fall off your seat. You're not going to look at the monitor and go, huh? All of these you will recognize. Let me show you. So let me explain what they are, and then I will tell you what's different. So you have people, the business case, communications, measurement, culture, process, reinforcement, and review. All language we use all the time. So what's the difference? The successful companies, they don't address one or two of these 8, but throughout their journey of excellence, they focus on all 8. Not at the same time, but throughout the whole journey. Quite often you see companies launch the new strategy, and then they send everyone for training, or they put in a new scorecard, or a new performance management. But it's not just about doing 1 or 2, it's about doing multiple activities over the journey. And there's one very important message extracted from our research, and that is, if strategy is about making the right choices, then what is implementation all about? So strategy is the choice of which market, segment, who we're going to focus on, how we deliver. So what is execution? Sorry, the words implementation and execution are synonymous. So what is the execution all about? It's about taking the right actions. It's about knowing what to do inside your organization. So for example, we look at digitalization today. And for the native-born digital companies, there are 4 things that they do very well. Whether you look at Tencent and Ping An in Asia, or you're looking at Netflix or Spotify from the West, there are 4 common themes. They take action around defining the new business model. They take action around rewriting the rules of competition, about rewiring the way employees think and work. And finally, they take the right action around reshaping the value that is created and captured. And the focus is discipline. And the 8 areas that I just shared with you, to help you remember them, I put them into the shape of a model called the implementation compass. So you'll recognize already I've introduced the 8 areas. I call it a compass because your strategy is your map. It shows you where you are and where you're going to. The compass shows you your direction or the action to take to get there. And the leader's role is to guide the organization through the journey, coaching and giving feedback. So I'm going to explain each of the 8 areas in a little bit more detail and give you some examples and stories. At North, we have people. Now, the compass, you will notice, is circular. You can start anywhere on the compass. You could start with measurement or review, but I'm going to just start at the top. When you look at people, what is the key message? Your people have to be engaged in the execution, and they have to be passionate about it with the right capabilities. The caliber of the people in the room dictates the caliber of the execution. So how do you make sure you have the right caliber? That goes right back to the initial hiring and then the journey path and the training of your employees. The business case at Northeast. Now, some of you might say, business case, what's that? It's not such common language. The business case is why is your organization transforming. You have to share the message of why do we need to change. And when you do that successfully, it doesn't guarantee that you'll execute with excellence, but it certainly helps you along the journey. So let me explain some examples of the business case. McKinsey showed and demonstrated that when organizations explain the desired outcomes of their digital solutions in advance of the launch of the strategy, they are 3.5 times more likely to succeed. Now, considering that 84% of the time we fail, this is a significant, easy-to-do initiative that can help you succeed. A few years ago, I was working with Microsoft when they were focusing on their channels, and they launched a strategy globally called Customer Partner Experience. And here in Asia Pacific, I was working with the head of the strategy, and we wanted to first explain the business case before we launched it. So across Microsoft offices, in the back office, posters went up. And the first poster was an aircraft flying into cloud. And the message to employees across Microsoft was, we're flying high today, but there's turbulence just ahead. There was a brief email from Natasha, who was running the strategy, saying, check out the poster. 2 weeks later, we changed the poster. It was customers hanging on to the outside of a building. The message was, are we losing grip on our customers? 2 weeks after that, the next poster was a guy walking on a tightrope saying it's taken us 25 years to get to the top, but it only takes a second to fall. The message was that even though we're good today, will we be good tomorrow? This created a groundswell of curiosity across Microsoft Asia Pacific, and only then did we launch the customer partner experience and explain that everything we do today contributes to tomorrow's customer experience. And then we looked internally what needed to change. But by taking the time to explain why the company had to transform, set us up for success. Now, communication. Oh, I bury my head. Leaders know they have to communicate, but yet they're so bad at it. You have to not just launch your strategy and then disappear. You've got to keep nurturing, sharing what's working, what's not working, customer feedback, best practices. So 2 tips on communication. Number 1, 7 times, 7 times. People need, and this comes from advertising, people need to see and hear a message 7 times in 7 different ways before they understand the message. So don't just share once in a town hall. Think of 6 other ways you can engage the audience. And my second tip is, when you're talking to the board and the C-suite above you, communicate more facts and figures. When you're engaging your employees and you're talking to the front line, use more stories. So a simple rule of thumb, more facts going upwards, more stories going downwards. Now, looking at Southeast, measurement. Over the last 20 years, we've got better at measurement. With the help of the introduction of the balanced scorecard and now digitalization and the focus on data, we're getting stronger. But still, when I walk into many organizations, I see they don't have the right measures, or they're trying to focus on too many. But here's the key message for measurement. Change your strategy, change your measures. Now you might go, huh, that's straightforward. Unbelievably, so many organizations don't change their measures when they launch a new strategy. The classic example in today's world is when you launch digitalization. Now you need new measures to track, for example, how many of our digital customers are coming on board through digital? What is the value from digitalization? How much transaction is digitalized? For example, how much paper have we removed out of our system? How simpler are our processes? All these new measures have to come in place because measures drive behaviors. What gets measured gets done. So change your strategy, change your measures. It will change the way your people act. And one more tip. With so much data out there, it can get very overwhelming. So pay attention to the vital few, not the trivial many. Focus on what you really need to know and don't get distracted trying to manage too many measures. Now, we move to South and culture. Culture is the way we do everything. So what is important about culture and execution? And here's the relationship. Two organizations can have the same strategy, but how they execute depends on their culture. So for example, Singapore Airlines and United, they both fly the newest aircrafts, they both have cabin crew, offer you food and offer you movies. But what's the difference of the experience? Is the culture of the airlines. Singapore Airlines were our first client when I launched my company Bridges, and we worked with them for 2 years, rolling out their global strategy. It was all about conformity and standards and offering excellent service. United, well, do you remember this story? The passenger who was dragged off the flight because they were overbooked. What kind of airline has a strategy that says drag physically passengers off an aircraft because we messed up internally? Well, what was interesting was, why was Dr. Dow identified to be dragged off the flight? Because an algorithm predicted he was the lowest revenue contributor to the airline, so the least impact. But of course, the airline ended up paying millions in damages, and quite rightly. So in culture, it's driven, your execution is driven by your culture. So moving around to processes. This is the way we work, the way we do things every day. And in a digitalized world, you're either innovating or eliminating, getting rid of archaic legacy ways of doing things and innovating new ways. So I thought we'd have a bit of fun, and I'll share some examples. Here's one from South Korea. When you go to your local Kohl's, your local supermarket, when you're buying bananas, today you have a choice. You either buy them green and you can eat them in a few days, or you can buy them yellow and they go off in a few days. Well, a company in South Korea came up with a very simple solution. Talk about reinventing your business model. They offer from green to yellow, and what's even more interesting is they charge 3 times more than their competition, and they sell more. So they got a great offer, very simple innovation. Or you look at Melbourne, where I used to live. In Melbourne, the Botanical Gardens is now offering picnic in the gardens. They can't have people in the restaurants during when they were in lockdown, so they came up with an alternative solution. Again, innovate. Now, these are a bit of fun ones, so let's take a little bit more deep. Here in Singapore, we started to see digital dogs running around the parks. These were to make sure people were social distancing. Or I work with a couple of manufacturing companies who have introduced dark warehouses where everything is run by robotics, so you don't need to put the lights on. You can see in the middle of the picture, the dark warehouse. Or people like Johnson & Johnson are now doing keyhole and surgery using robotics. How would you feel? You go for surgery and it's a robot instead of a surgeon. Or another example, in Dubai, they now have robotic policing. This one's very popular. This is a laundry bot. You pull out your clean washing, put it in at the bottom, and it comes out folded and pressed at the top. Okay. Quite expensive at the moment, but hopefully we'll get cheaper because we all want one of these. And my final example comes from Japan. This is a marketing company who's given an AI, a robot, a vote on the board. What? Why not? Using machine learning, logical, so the machine actually has a vote on the board. Very changing world. So it's estimated that when you're transforming, especially into digitalization, up to 80% of your capabilities need to change. Now, let's move to the penultimate, reinforcement. People step up. they start to take the right actions. They're communicated to. The organization has started to innovate, empower them to change processes. Then they take the right actions, and nothing happens. Huh? If they're not reinforced for taking the right actions, they'll step back. So how do you reinforce your team when they take the right action? What is the #1 motivator of people at work in Australia and New Zealand? Many of you will be thinking, money! Wrong. Hewitt Associates, the largest outsourcing HR company in the world, from their research, we know money is #5. 1 is purpose. People today work for a purpose, especially millennials. And when your boss comes up and says thank you and gives you a pat on the back, that is a greater motivator than money. Now, a lot of you are going, rubbish, you know. So, the research reinforces this. People want to contribute to something greater than themselves. 2, 3, and 4 are, do you have a friend at work? Do you like your boss? Are you comfortable with the benefits? But this is what makes a difference, saying thank you to your team. Now, let me move over to Northwest, which is the final area, review. You have to constantly review your execution. How often is execution typically reviewed? Unfortunately, only once or twice a year. But how often should it be reviewed? Well, by the C-suite every quarter, by departments every 2 weeks, and by leaders weekly talking to their people. In other words, you create a rhythm, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly. So you create the assurance that you're going to follow up. One last challenge. Have a look at the numbers in front of you and tell me what you see. Now, many of you will be looking at the last line going, Robin, you idiot, 4 times 4 is not 20. So what is my message here? I got 75% right. But what did many of you focus on? What I got wrong. Now, on our journey into execution, it's all about experimentation, especially in today's business environment. And when employees get things right, you need to say thank you and encourage them. But too often I see leaders focusing on what went wrong rather than what goes right. So what should you be doing different? Say, Robin, you got 75% right. Can you identify where you could get 100% right? So you coach me. You don't tell me. You coach me, which is the role of leadership in execution, to guide through. So in the deck that I've shared with you, you'll get a summary around the implementation compass. And I got 3 final questions before James and I are going to have a chat. When you look at these 8 areas for excellence and execution, which direction is the hardest to execute? They're all hard, but one is the hardest. South, culture. Why? Because culture is about changing everything. Second question, which direction receives the most resistance? Now, they all receive pushback, but one in particular gets the most resistance, and that is measurement. Many organizations still only do annual performance reviews, but today, using data analytics, we can track daily performance. And this scares the bedivas out of many employees, and they go, whoa, no way, just leave me alone. Very hard. And the third one is which direction is least practiced by leaders, not just in ANZAC, but across the world. And this is review. Leaders don't have the focus to follow through. So I kicked off by asking you A or B. If those who said A, I hope I've convinced some of you that it is about the execution. It's about having a great strategy and good execution. And I'm going to leave you with just one more very important message. And with so many presentations over 2 days, if nothing else from my time with you, please remember this as you start to prepare for 2021. Customers notice your execution, not your strategy. So have the discipline. Look at the 8 areas for excellence in execution, and make sure you're taking the right actions, holding your team accountable, and reviewing the work that's being done. Okay? So half an hour after I finished talking, you've already forgotten half of what I said. So I'm just going to finish off by sharing, I'm just going to share with you my newest book, Digital Implementation Playbook, and another one coming out. I also run a company called the Strategy Implementation Institute that offers online training and certification in implementation. Okay? And we offer many things around the compass. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I wish you all the best on your journey of execution.